Do not adjust your monitor. I actually look like this. I got myself a second Bose Soundlink Flex. Oh, hang on a second. No, I didn't. I got myself the Tozo Pa1 that looks nothing like the Bose Soundlink Flex. Well, yes, it looks like a clone of the Bose Soundlink Flex thingy-jig. You did point it out to me in the comments. I did think it was interesting. I did go and get it. Do you know why it's interesting? Well, it looks like the Bose Soundlink Flex, but if I was to buy the Bose Soundlink Flex, it would cost me 150, 140 quid, or even 130 quid if it's on a deal, or £30. If I go to a website, it's 30 quid. If I go on Amazon, it's 40 quid and US $40. I figured, what could possibly go wrong? I looked at the reviews on Amazon.uk, and they were awful. Well, no, they weren't actually. It said 4.9 out of 5 from like 1,000 reviews. Well, as we know, Amazon reviews are the oracle in terms of reviews, so I'm confident this is one of the greatest speakers I've ever heard since the Motion X600. The best speaker I've ever heard. No joke, or maybe it's a joke, I don't know. So it's interesting. It is almost a clone, not exactly the same, but to all intents and purposes it's the same, even to the point where we got the 4 protrusions on the bottom of the Flex. We've got the exact same things on the Tozo Pa1. So the bottom is exactly the same. On the top, let's have a look. Well, it's not exactly the same. We've got power, but there we got the link for 2 of them. So you can link 2 of the Tozo and Pa1, but only in party mode. It does not do stereo pairing for 2 of them. But of course the Soundlink Flex does do stereo pairing, so that's different. So it's the volume down where we got the link button on the Pa1, then multifunction play pause, volume up, volume down, volume up, and the EQ button. But it's the Bluetooth button, or light at the end of the Flex. We've got 3 modes. So we only get 1 mode on the Flex. And what good is that? Well, do you know what? I've yet to come across a speaker that's got multiple EQs that actually has 1 really good EQ. Up to now, it's always been a trade-off. They seem to favour being able to market multiple EQs rather than get 1 EQ absolutely bang on. So we've got the default mode, which they call standard. Then we've got the treble mode, which is like the piercing highs, and then the bass mode, which is, well, we're going to get onto that, isn't it? That's the whole point of the video. Otherwise, what is the point? Now, there is an app for this. It's unusual on these cheaper speakers, isn't it, to get app support. And it's a reasonable app. It's not the greatest ever. But what it does have that we like, what's that out? I'm going to tell you. You can make a custom EQ. So, Tribit-like, there's loads of different custom settings. We've got 3 on the speaker itself, but there's loads of different, like classical and jazz and all that stuff. You go into the app, and you can customize each. That's brilliant, isn't it? No, it's not. Do you know why? Because if you set, it doesn't embed. So you set a custom EQ, and you can improve it, not to a great extent, and because you have to customize an actual preset, they are set differently. So to get your custom EQ right, you have to already pick out whether you want the high volume or the low volume or whatever. It's not straightforward, but you can improve each EQ mode. But it doesn't embed. So you turn off your phone, or you turn off the speaker, you turn it back on, you'd have to go back into the app to set that EQ again. So boo, boo, boo. That's why I'm not really going to do a custom EQ in this. You can tinker with it, but it's not great. It's not Soundcore-like. I mean, they are class leading with their EQ in their app, and it embeds, and that's when it gets serious. That's when I get serious. So it's got 5 speakers. No, it hasn't got the 5. Spatial audio. Oh, the world's gone mad for spatial audio, but they don't really understand what it is. But hey ho, it doesn't matter. So we've got 1 driver. By the way, in their specs, they give the size of the passive radiator for some reason. And they say 67 millimeters for the full range single driver. It's actually 50 millimeters. And then there's a single passive radiator, and the difference is full range driver, and we've got a passive front and a passive back. It's rated at 20 watts. It is IPX7, which means you can drop it in water for up to 30 minutes, up to 1 meter. And brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. you can drop it in water, it will float, and it will float with the driver up. It becomes really, really useful. Something fun to do when you're on your lilo and you're in the swimming pool. I don't know if you've actually done that, but it's really, really lots of fun for about 2 minutes, and then people wonder what the hell you are doing. They say 12-hour battery at 50%. I do like that they said at 50% volume. No, I haven't tested that, but rather than the headline's 24 hours and they don't, and it's mixed use, and they don't, and for all I know, they could have tested it at 10% or with the volume off, and it'll last for 100 years. I don't know, but that's nice. They've told you it's at 50% volume, 12 hours. So first thing I ever do when I get hold of a speaker is I test I measure the frequency response just to get a handle. You've got to remember, loads of dynamic processing going on in all these Bluetooth speakers. A sine wave sweep does not always translate into the real world, but on a sine wave sweep, this is what I measure.
Volume steps are reasonably linear, but the whole sound seems to hinge on 3 distinct peaks. 200 Hz for the bass and punch, 3 kHz for some kind of mids, and 13 kHz for piercing treble, maybe some air. Decreasing bass adjustment as you expect, going up the volume steps, very bass light by 80%, and actually less bass, mid bass, deeper bass at maximum volume than you'd get at 80%. Treble mode. If you look at the mids, you can see treble mode is automatically going louder than standard mode. We still have a sound based on 200 Hz, 3 kHz, 13 kHz. We still have mids light sound, but even more mids light in treble mode. And weirdly, if you look, treble at maximum volume has more bass than standard mode. And then we've got bass mode. Even weirder things going on with bass mode. First of all, you can see it has the least volume of all EQ modes, but maximum volume has less mid bass than even the 60% volume mark. And again, 80% has less bass till you hit, well, where it's completely rolled off anyway, than 60%. Even bigger dip in the mids for bass mode. Bass mode basically fills out from the 200 mark and down till you get some bass, but you still have your massive peaks. 3 kHz, we've now got a 5.5 kHz peak, and we've got our 13 kHz peak. We overlay them, 60%, but you can see you're getting different volumes out of the different modes. So it's not just some tinkering. They're messing with the volume. Treble mode is your loudest mode. Bass mode is your quietest mode. And standard mode at 60% has less bass than all of them. Overlay them to see what's actually going on. They're hinging around the 1 kHz mark. And the real difference is really the 1 kHz and down, where it's supposed for the bass, reduction for the treble, and standard mode in between the two. 80% the same thing going on. And when we've actually normalized them, we can see, it's hinging around 1 kHz, but the highs are not that different in reality. The biggest difference is the volume that they give you. Maximum volume, bass mode has the most, no it doesn't, it has the least bass of all the modes. It's the bass mode. Treble mode has the most bass, and it goes the loudest. And standard mode becomes something of a rolled off treble mode. It is really, really weird tuning on this speaker, and I can show you how weird it is. If I take standard mode at 60% and bass mode at 80%, bass mode is actually a bit more balanced. It's got a bit more in the highs, and it fills out the mids and the bass more. You could almost say bass at 80% is standard mode at 60%, but a little bit better.
Just in case you want to hear the startup, a lot of people get excited at startup sounds, and here we go. Oh, you got to hold it down. I don't like that to get it go on, and then a little bit of a delay. So one of the messiest tunings I have ever seen, because I mean, you do what you want with the EQ, and I can say, oh, that's good, that's not bad. But it defies all logic what they've done. How can a bass mode actually have less bass as it's at its headroom, as it's 100% volume, than the treble or the standard mode? Why would you call that a bass mode? Other than they've rolled everything off so it sounds more bass heavy. But there is more bass to be had. Why you couldn't even argue? Well, they're stopping it from distorting, because treble mode has the most bass, and it's got the most mids, and it's got the most highs. It defies logic. And here's the thing. To get the best out of this speaker, and just to give you a clue how I'm going to test it, by the way, this defaults to AAC, even on Android. You can switch it to SBC. So I've done the testing in AAC because that's its default setting. At lower volume, 50% and below. For me, the best mode is standard mode. Muddy to hell the bass mode, and piercing is the treble mode, by far the more balanced, and very clear is the standard mode. But once you've gone over 50%, and I've just showed you that in the frequency response measurements, if I didn't see it go back, 60%, it's the same volume, 60% for standard mode as it is for having set 80% if you're in bass mode. They are the same volume, and bass mode has a better balance, has more bass, and it has a better response. Again, so that the tuning is illogical. I mean, not just bad, but it's illogical. I mean, they really had a big night out. I say this all the time. They had a few sherbets before that. If you don't know what sherbets are in the UK, that's be called having a good bloody drink, to be fair. So it is nonsense. So I'm using the low volume testing default mode. Once I've gone over 50%, I'm switching to bass mode and then increasing the volume to, I think, 75%, which is the same volume as if I was like 55% on standard mode, because that sounds the best. And then when I do the maximum volume test, it will be treble mode, because again, it just goes loud and all. It's crazy, crazy, crazy. Let's get into testing. Okay, just for starters, against the speakers you've already seen on the table, and we've seen them recently because I call them the usual suspects, and they are the two speakers for me that still are the ones to think about at this level. I say at this level, but I talk about them around the 50 quid mark, and they are indeed around the 50 quid mark, and about the same in dollars. But is that fair? That's a 30 quid. It's nearly half the price, but I still think it's fair. Because I think 0 to 50, in terms of sound quality, what you can get, and at the size, see, they're about the same size. These are the two reference points. The Soundcore Boost reference for a bass-heavy speaker, and the Tribit, which one is it out? It's the Tribit maxsound Plus. It's the reference for a neutral, it's not really neutral, but neutral-ish, very clear sounding speaker. So they will both suit different tastes. If you really want something in the middle, I would suggest the Me for Wild Rod, but yeah, it's a bit bigger, a bit more expensive. But I think this is a fair test. It will give us a reference where we are. So 40%, then loudness match for the other two speakers. Sound clip.
Tomorrow. Give me some, I'ma catch a murder case. On my clock, in this cop, mask on my face. Hesitate to give me some, I'm catch a murder case. Dirty on the clock, when I get clock, whipping on the scene. When I get cracked, lean on the beat, on me, that's it. I need to take the key, when I'm in a take the key, when I'm in a get dirty on the clock, when I get clock, whipping on the scene. When I get cracked, lean on the beat, on me.
I said it's really, really messy tuning and illogical on the Tozo. What they have done, and I can kind of understand at this price level, with the limits of a single driver. The whole sound basically hinges on 3 peaks. We've got a 200 peak, 200 hertz peak for upper bass punch. We've got a 3 kilohertz peak for your mids, and then we've got a third crazy. You see this a lot. I know it's quite popular. 13 kilohertz peak for a bit of air, and it does a little bit of clarity. But to me, it makes it sound too electronic. I don't really favour EQing too high above 10 kilohertz. I know a lot of my custom EQs do that, but it's because I'm using Soundcore apps and stuff, and it's dragging everything else up with it. However, that's quite high for you know, quite a narrow peak. Just to say, that's how that speaker is tuned. It kind of works for what it's giving out at 30 quid. It sounds okay. It sounds not too bad. I wouldn't be crying if I spent 30 quid on that and I heard it. And that's it. So against the maxsound Plus, I mean, look, we've got 2 drivers. It's proper stereo and that's mono, but it sounds sweeter. It's a nicer spread of sound, but there's a little bit more body in the Tozo. I mean, it kind of holds its own, but not really, depending on where your ears are. If you are a neutral loving fan, you will prefer the maxsound Plus. But it's not a million miles away, the PA1. The maxsound Plus sounds better, sounds less compressed, there's more going on, and certainly sounds more natural. And that certainly sounds closed in. It's a single driver, but you really hear that. It does sound closed in. But it's punchy, depending on if you're playing some punchy music. You'll certainly might well prefer that over the maxsound Plus. It's you know, they know what they're delivering, and it delivers a reasonably clear sound with punch for 30 quid at lower volumes. Brings us to the bass heavy champ for size and price. The Soundcore, it says Anger, Soundcore Boost. Because this goes deeper into the bass, because it's a fuller sound, against the Boost, you really hear the problems of relying on 3 peaks for your complete tuning. It's not terrible. You could certainly enjoy listening to it. I think it's definitely worth 30 quid. I mean, it's almost a giveaway at 30 quid, but it's not that much more in real terms. Yes, 20 quid, almost double, but in real terms, it's not that much more to move up. But what happens? We move it up to more listenable volumes for me personally, and I've already said switching it to bass mode, going to 75%. Just know if you was in default mode, that would be the same volume as about 55%. So 75% bass mode, which is the only mode to listen to for me at those sort of volumes, against the usual suspects.
Oh no, now the truth comes out and I know that you want me about it. Shallow, you were only ever in for yourself, in for yourself. Oh great, fantastic, you left it all. I like you plastic, and it's so long. Over your antics, you showed me on. I hope that you're happy now. Yeah, you like the sun, take a look around. Look what you did last night, what you did last night, never listen. Yeah, I know that you don't want attention. You're right this time, you're right this time, yeah. Rushing, hit your cards away for nothing. There's a fire in me, melting at the bottom of the sea. It was a beautiful thing. All these memories trying to hold me back, but they can't see. I was born to be free.
At these volumes in bass mode, not bad at all. It's giving the maxsound Plus a run for its money. It's sounding a bit fuller, making the maxsound Plus sound a bit thinner. But that is due to how much upper bass boost it has on the Tozo Pa1 compared to a little bit deeper bass. It certainly has more mid bass, but that comes over as punchy, not because it's punchier, but because it's massively boosted. What you said, 200 hertz. At lower volumes, bass mode is horrendous. I mean, it's just bass. I was not bothered with mids and highs. It's so muffled. But as you go up the volume, not bad at all. Still a little bit muffled, but a reasonable tuning. But could it be better? Absolutely. They could have tuned this better. You may still prefer this over the maxsound Plus if you just want a fun sound. You know, that punchy sound is party-ish. It's fun, whereas that's a more serious listen. And then we got the bass heavy king, the Soundcore boost. And again, I think it's the boost that really shows up the limits of the PA1 and its tuning the most. Because when there is no, it's got a very heavy, as we said, boosted upper bass 200 hertz, just at 200 hertz. But it's enough to give it some punch and a sense of bass. But when you've got a track like that where there's parts where it's just vocals and no bass, so you've got a complete gap between 200 hertz and 3 kilohertz, it sounds awful. Because you got all you've got there is 3 kilohertz and the 13 kilohertz, and nothing else going on. Whereas that's full through the mids and the highs. Anyway, so for me, again, it's the boost that shows the limits of this speaker. Part of the limits of this speaker is silly tuning. It's also, you know, as I said, very closed in. It's a mono speaker, yeah, but it is very closed in sounding because, you know, those highs are muted anyway, and that's got 2 drivers. You've got a little bit of stereo going on. For me, it's a massive win for the boost. And it's a massive win if you don't like mids, because there's no mids at all. In bass mode, well, all the tunings, they've got a dip in the mids. The scooping out just to make the most of a few little peaks, as we already said. But of course, Alan, you've got the Bose Soundlink Flex on the table and you didn't even play it. I did. Have a listen. Do you know what? I was actually surprised how close that was. You may be as well. Yes, they clearly tuned it to match the Bose Soundlink Flex. That's 140 quid, that's 30 quid. You could basically get nearly you could get 4.5 of them for the price of a Flex. It's good value. It could have been better. And although although the tuning is very close, the Flex does sound better. You are getting something there. It's smoother, the bass is better, and it just sounds fuller. Even though if you look at a frequency response, it's so close. You can see they almost have tuned this to be a Flex, but with that high end peak. But yeah, you've got the 3 kilohertz peak and the 13 kilohertz peak, and actually they've got the same peak now, 200 hertz. The difference is they've only got a 200 hertz peak, but it extends more on the Flex. It's closer than I expected, but the Flex shows what the extra money gets you, and also tells us, although it's not the greatest speaker of all time, it's not the worst speaker of all time, and at 30 quid, it's got, I have to say that's good value. For me, I wouldn't buy that over the Boost or the maxsound Plus, but I can understand why but again, a big miss, isn't it? You compare 2 of them, but not in stereo. So you'd be thinking, oh, and that's, they've taken aim at the Bose Soundlink Flex, but the Flex does do 2 in stereo. And when you've got mono speakers like this, that's a big difference. We have to test all of them, every one of them, even though I need to do that at lower volumes. Maximum volume.
Rocks now dead, nothing left to do this thing. No one gets to
So maximum volume, who goes the loudest? It's the Tribit maxsound Plus with X-Bass turned on, but it's doing that really almost a one-note tuning around the 750 Hz mark, and it's not going to sound that great. The best listen here is the Bose Soundlink Flex, and it's less than half a decibel in overall loudness behind the maxsound Plus. Yes, it's 2.5 decibels behind in peaks, but that's because the Tribit maxsound Plus is putting all its peak into one area. The Soundlink Flex is keeping hold of a listenable sound, consistent sound. It's the white line. You can see it's got the most bass, and it doesn't roll off the highs. In orange, the treble mode of the Tozo Pa1, which is its loudest mode, this weirdly tuned speaker, and you can see its massive 2.8-ish peak, kilohertz peak. Again, it's not nice when it's a one-note tuning, and it's not. We got two notes. We got a 200 Hz and a 2.8 kilohertz, but not a great listen. It's rolled off everywhere else. The Soundcore Boost remains a smooth sounding speaker. It's keeping hold of mids and bass, but it's rolling off the highs the most here. It is harder to keep hold of bass as you push volumes, and they're making sure it sounds bassy at all volumes.
So here, it's a clear win for the Bose Soundlink Flex. You can see what your extra money, it's a lot of extra money, it's Bose. Some of that money is just for the name in white lettering, Bose. We know that. Big brands, you will pay for they've got more overheads. They put more into actual development and research and marketing. That's partly what you're paying for, along with simply having the name on the speaker. But yes, the quality is better. You could technically go louder with the maxsound Plus, but you'd probably need new ears or earplugs anyway, because it's very, very screechy. It isn't a screechy sound on the Boost, but it's a very rolled off high end, but at least it does save your ears. It goes sort of loud as the others, but not quite. And it does give you some of that bass, but you know, they all have limits. I think we finally come to the point where, you know, having 3 peaks for your complete tuning, it doesn't work. So it sounds horrible. And I think actually, they dropped one of those peaks. So actually, yeah, by the time getting to maximum volume, they're left with 1 peak, and that is the 3 kilohertz peak. So, you know, it's crazy. Hey, it's decent value, 30 quid, can't knock it. It could have been better, simply with different tuning. Not because I'm saying it's a matter of taste, but because I showed you, if you measure and compare all 3 EQs, it makes absolutely no sense what they've done in terms of the difference in volumes and headroom. And well, it just makes no sense at all. It's crazy, could have been better. Maybe one day it will be. We can compare the specs, and then we can get out of here and get on with our lines, just to compare between all of them. I've already mentioned a lot of it. They're all made in China. No, they're not. I got ya. Finally got ya. Do you know where my Bose Soundlink Flex was made in? Thailand.
Huh?
It's a fun place to go if you've ever been. But yeah, that's $140, $150 speaker, whereas the others are all 50 quid, apart from 30 quid or 40 quid at the moment on Amazon. But the website was actually significantly cheaper. So we're talking about what do you get for your money? Only the Soundlink Flex has multi-point support. So you can connect to 2 different devices at the same time and switch between them. But weirdly, I'm saying it's got the smallest battery. It's 11 watt hours. So 11 watt hours is the worst on the table. We've got 19 watt hours for the Boost. We've got 16 watt hours for the maxsound Plus, and we've got 15 watt hours for the PA1. All SBC, but only the PA1 has also AAC support, and actually defaults to AAC on Android. Or do stereo pairing, except the PA1, which will pair, but only in party mode, all USB-C connection. Only the maxsound Plus. This is another thing to go for the maxsound Plus, because it's the only one with an auxiliary input. Only the Soundcore Boost, that little thing, can be used as a power bank. Can all be used to make phone calls. All rated at 20 watts, except for the maxsound Plus is rated at 24 watts. All around the same weight, but just to tell you, the Flex 587 grams, the Boost 624 grams, the maxsound Plus 610 grams. It's actually, no, it's not the heaviest. That 624 is the heaviest, and 582 grams for the Flex clone. They are all IPX7, but it's the Flex. Again, what are you paying the extra money for? It's also it's IP67, 6 meaning it's dust proof. The maxsound Plus will not float. All the others will float, but it's only the Tozo Pa1 that will float with the drivers up. That's a big plus in my book, to be quite honest. In terms of those drivers, it's a single 54 centimeter, they're saying, full range driver for the Flex, 2 passive radiators. We've got 2 44 millimeter drivers for the Boost and 2 passive radiators. We've got 2 45 millimeters drivers for the, or transducers, I know all you modern people want to call them, and 2 passive radiators on the maxsound Plus, but just, and 1 50 millimeter. They say 67. It's not 67. That's the frame. The actual driver's 50 millimeter, and it has a single passive radiator. There's only one speaker on this table that has, wait for it, titanium drivers. There's only one speaker on this table that has an auxiliary input, I already said, and it's got no lag at all. It's got an auxiliary input. It's got 160 milliseconds of lag, if you don't know. That's horrendous. In terms of streaming YouTube on via Bluetooth, well, the Bose Soundlink Flex is brilliant. 33 milliseconds in my latest testing versus all the others are unusable from 135 to 220 milliseconds. I mean, that's really poor. So one of the real downsides of 30 quid is 220 milliseconds of lag. If you can't adjust the actual audio latency or sync on your device, it would be unusable for sync. Oh, no, they don't all have app support. No, the maxsound Plus does not have app support. The others all have app support. The Soundcore has class-leading multi-band proper graphic equalizer. You've got equalizer for the PA1, but it doesn't embed, and you'd have to go back and set it each and every time. And there is app support, but there's no EQ for the Bose. It is interesting because that's one of the big sellers on Amazon. 4.9 out of 1,000 reviews. Maybe 2 are genuine. I don't know, but it's not bad. It's, you know, some of these speakers you pick up and they're horrendous. This one, not bad. It's frustrating because it could be quite a bit better. You can actually make a difference yourself anyway going in the app, but it's not a straightforward app because it's you've got to base it on one of their presets, and their presets are defined differently. So you can't just use the same kind of EQ to make it look the same in the graph on each and every one of their customizations. So you'd have to do that individually, but you could certainly make a difference. You certainly get more clarity in the bass mode. There you go. I think you got a contender. 30 quid. Job done in terms of we sorted out another one. You know, you could tell your mates and all. I don't know. You're buying a present for your 7-year-old. 30 quid. They'll be happy as Larry. I'm sure. You can tell them it's the best speaker ever, and I guarantee you, a lot of people will believe you, because that seems to be the case. Whatever you say, there'll be someone that believes you. Do you believe me? Thank you for watching. I hope to see you again.
What the f was that? You boom.
It comes from China.
My speaker's got deep bass, balanced mids, and a bright high